Hi and welcome to Outlaw Bookseller, and today we're going to look at the different variants of UK editions of the CORUM books from the 70s and early 80s. And primarily we're going to focus on the second trilogy, but we will be covering the first trilogy as well. So to begin our look at the CORUM trilogy, interestingly, the first CORUM trilogy, the Swords trilogy, were issued as paperback originals in Mayflower, and these are later editions when Mayflower became part of Granada. Mayflower and Panther were swallowed up into Granada in the sort of mid-70s. And they have what I always think of as Buddhist covers. This one particularly reminds me of sort of Buddhist iconography, and obviously they're a bit more savage than that, but they're very, very psychedelic, with these figures in the center of the frame and radiating bits of light or flame, giving the impression of chaos, because of course the Knight of the Swords, the Queen of the Swords, and the King of the Swords are all characters from the Elric universe. Elric and Melniboné, they're the Lords of Chaos. They are the patron demons which the Melnibonéans really worship, and CORUM really is in a different universe, and it's hard to tell where CORUM's universe is. Is it the past? Is it the future? The way a lot of the language and the place names are constructed in these books makes me think of Cornwall and Wales, certainly Celtic roots used in some of the words, but of course Mike was very good at mixing it up and bringing all sorts of elements in. And I haven't read these for a very long time, but they're very good. So of course you get in the Knight of the Swords, of course you have Arioch, you know, the patron demon of Elric. The Queen of the Swords, Zionbarg, pops up again in the most recently written Elric novel, Citadel of Forgotten Myths, and the King of the Swords of course is mentioned in the Elric books as well. But these were really sort of iconic things at the time. And Moorcock was such a big part of British alternative culture that, you know, there's a punk rock single from 1978 called How Much Longer by Alternative TV, a great band who I loved at the time. And it contains the lyrics in the song goes, "They talk about Moorcock, the Floyd and Reading Festival." And it's a reference to sort of 70s hippies in the UK. That's how predominant he was. He was a cultural icon, almost to the level of cliche. And you know, I remember the first time I did an event with Mike Moorcock in 1987, I think it was, and I got him to Bath for the launch of Mother London. It wasn't a launch, it was a signing session, and I advertised around the city, obviously through in-store displays in the shop window, but I put flyers and posters up in places like takeaways and pubs where I knew Moorcock fans would go, and it was great. We had 120 people turn up, and I remember when my boss was saying afterwards, "Oh, you know, we've done well here. This is how we do it." And really, I did it all. The only thing anybody else did was allow me to have the window space for a week or two. So that was my first real signing I organised. It was a great success, and Mike was charming, of course, as you'd expect. The first two of these appeared as paperback originals in 1971, and The King of the Swords appeared as a paperback original in 1972. So, you know, these are books which didn't have hardcovers. They went straight into paperback, and obviously the money was there. But Mike obviously mixed it up, because he would very much do this thing throughout the 60s, 70s and 80s, where he would have books coming from different publishers. It's a very, very handy thing, because if you get into disputes, so there's problems with editors or what have you, then you've got another string to your bow. And he was very, very good at negotiating and getting around that and making sure that the books kept coming out, which was good news for the fan base. Interestingly, here you'll see I have the Books of CORUM slipcase set. And of course there were lots of these around back in those days. Granada did loads of them and we all loved them, and you hardly ever see similar things now. They were done with nice stiff card and laminated. And this is an interesting one, because usually they would be just 3 books maybe for dancers. There were 4 books of the Hawk Moon series, and there are 4 in here, and you'll see there that this says Mayflower. So that's like a 79 print of Bull of the Spear, and these are slightly later prints, but it was issued at the same time there. So that's quite interesting, because you see the transition from one artist over to 2 different artists, and I'll talk about the artists on the later trilogy later in the video. But just to look at these are by Bob Haberfield, who you never hear much about, but he did quite a bit for Moorcock, and they're very distinctive and beautiful, as you think you'll agree. So there's a real difference between the two trilogies there in the presentation. So to have a 6-book series with 3 different artists, you know, it did create a bit of an issue in terms of commonality of livery. So this is the second trilogy, published by Allison and Busby in hardcover. Moorcock did quite a lot with Allison and Busby in hardcover from the late 60s right the way through until the early 80s. They published the final programme, Cure for Cancer, the rest of the Cornelius books. They did reissues of things right the way up until early 80s. They did the reissue of the final programme, which is very rare, which I have, which I'll show to you at some point. I have shown it on the channel before. But yeah, they did a lot with A and B. And also Barrington J. Bailey was published by Allison and Busby as well, which did lead to some legal problems later on for him, but we'll talk about that another time. So as you see on these, the jackets have wraparound art by Keith Roberts, and they do depict scenes from the books, and they have this sort of naive sort of folk style which Keith uses there. I've had the Oak and the Ram and the Sword and the Stallion in this format for quite a few years. They were bought for me by my friend the Good Doctor, who has appeared on the channel as a voiceover artist. Hopefully he'll appear again before too long. And I'd left the Bull and the Spear for a long time because these are quite expensive books, quite hard to get in good condition, particularly a lot of them went to libraries. And I also felt, well, you know, I've got loads of multiple editions of Moorcock. I've got rid of multiple editions in the past. Did I really want to go there? But I came across one recently and I thought, well, really, I've got to do it because, you know, the hour grows late. And, you know, I began collecting in terms of hardcovers with Moorcock. And, you know, as we come towards the end of my collecting of science fiction and fantasy in hardcover, my final library, it's good to go back to him. So here's the Bull and the Spear, and that's CORUM himself on the front of the jacket, of course. And the lady there on the spine is a woman who appears in the novel, who is, he feels, maybe a reincarnation of his lost love Ralina from the first trilogy. There we go. And beautiful artwork, I think you'll agree. And there is a price clip there, but I'm never that bothered about price clips personally. So there you go. Volume the first of the Chronicle of Prince CORUM and the Silver Hand. But I think it's Prince with the Scarlet Robe in later editions. I'll have to check that out. So this is a first, and this is from 1973. So there you go. 73, the early 70s is an interesting time for Moorcock because he's doing all sorts of things. The first Jerry Cornelius book, the final programme, has been made into a film by Robert Fuest. He is collaborating with Hawkwind, writing poetry and the odd lyric for them. Generally poetry, it has to be said, and occasionally he's performing it on stage with them live when Robert Calvert, who is their resident poet, wasn't well enough to perform because Robert did have some issues around being bipolar. And here's the Oak and the Ram, and I've just reread some of Bull and the Spear for the first time in many years. There's the ram on the cover, on the spine, and yeah, I mean, they are really fantastic, aren't they? And of course they're a great showcase for Keith Roberts' art, and Keith and Mike were friendly because of course they'd worked together way back, going back to Impulse and New Worlds, even though Roberts really wasn't that keen on the idea of New Wave. He was more of a traditional literary figure. But yeah, really nice. And as I say, these are hard to find in good nick. So we'll just take a look at the date. And this one is from 73 as well. So Moorcock, of course, had a formula for writing these sword and sorcery novels, which was approximately like this: 45,000 words, 3 days to write a book, 15,000 words a day, a bottle of whiskey every day. Whether that's actually true, the latter part, I don't know. But of course, he wrote most of these to either finance New Worlds or to recover his finances from financing New Worlds magazine himself. It's interesting because the sword and sorcery books are kind of seen as the centre of his oeuvre, where I regard them really as not peripheral because they're the most popular things, but they're not the most important part of his oeuvre, even though they're important books as sword and sorcery, and they're absolutely seminal and really good. The really important part of his work is with New Worlds and with writing avant-garde SF like the Jerry Cornelius series, and later on in the 80s his literary novels just like Mother London, his award-winning fantasy novel Gloriana and those sort of things. And in the 80s, I think he had more time to raise the bar and spend it on writing really, really well-written books. And these are books which the sales of which would have helped enormously with that. And there's the Sword and the Stallion. And again, really nice wraparound artwork. Let's take a look at that. Absolutely great. And you do see these sometimes, but as I say, they're hard to find in good condition. And let's see, this is from 74, so that came the year after. So they appeared in really rapid succession, and I think you'll agree those are absolutely gorgeous. So I'm really pleased to complete the set on that front. Initially in paperback in the UK, the second CORUM trilogy appeared in these lovely quartet A format books with cover designs by Patrick Woodruff, wonderful artist. And I know I've shown some of these on the channel recently because I think I recently completed with these two. And these used to be really common, but now they're really hard to find in the UK as people have been picking the Moorcock paperbacks up. And of course there's loads out there in really bad condition. So if you're trying to find them in really good condition, they're kind of premium prices now. And these are super editions. And Woodruff, great artist. He did lots of artwork in the 70s and 80s for books, album covers. I remember he did album covers, prog rock album covers for people like Greenslade, and he even did some for the neo-prog people in the 80s, I seem to recall as well. So these are really beautiful. So as you see, they are a different publisher to the first trilogy. The first trilogy was published by Mayflower as paperback originals, as I said earlier in the video. If you had all six, they were mismatched, and they were never editions, I don't think, of the first three volumes in hardcover. I know there was a Hutchinson hardcover of The Knight of the Swords. I don't think they ever did Queen of the Swords and King of the Swords though, Singletons. And The Knight of the Swords, I think in Hutchinson, was later on. They mostly went to libraries. You can still pick it up, but it's not a very exciting looking book, so I've never really bothered with that one. Just as an aside really, this is the album Sad Rings of Destiny by Judas Priest from 1976. And this is a Patrick Woodruff cover, very beautiful, I think you'll agree. And this is an exceptionally fine hard rock record, my favourite heavy metal album of all time, and completely definitive. And it's a great record. No matter what sort of rock music you like, if you've never heard it, you really must get it. It is fantastic, very beautiful, and it's got some fantasy type themes in it as well. So that's an example of Woodruff's work for the whole world of rock and roll. And interestingly, later on, Judas Priest albums on this label, the Gull label, were reissued with artwork by Melvin, whose work appeared on the last two CORUM books in the Mayflower editions. So this is the second trilogy as it appeared when I was selling them in the early 80s when I first came into the book trade. And as you see, they have two different artists represented. So the fourth book of CORUM, The Bull and the Spear. Here, this is, let's see, that's Rodney Matthews. I like Rodney Matthews a lot, actually. And you do hear a lot about him these days. But he's really, really good. And he did some great depictions, particularly of Elric, which I really like, and some fantastic dancers at the end of time ones. So here we see a Rodney Matthews. And then interestingly, as Mayflower Granada moved on to the two later volumes in the trilogy, they brought on Melvin, who has this very distinctly heavy metal style there, which is vaguely impressionistic. There's a lot of helmets. His figures tend to be hidden always. And as you see, they are quite beautiful. I really like the Sword and the Stallion particularly. I think that really stands out with that peachy orange background and the yellow typeface. So Melvin there. And Melvin at that point looked like he was going to become the Moorcock artist of choice. And if you bought The Vanishing Tower, the Elric novel at that point, that had a Melvin cover as well. But none of the other ones ever did. So he was sort of flavour of the month for a little while. Some of his pictures were later used for reissues of Judas Priest albums from the early 70s, the ones which were on the Gull label. This is a Japanese CD reissue of Hero Hero by Judas Priest, which is something that Gull Records threw together, taking tracks from the first two albums, and they popped on an unreleased single as well. So that's Melvin's artwork there. And this was available as a huge, it was a double gatefold LP, of course, as well, with bigger artwork, but really, really nice work. And I don't know why he didn't sort of get bigger than he did, really. He was pretty good. He's very martial, and I think very stentorian, very metal, as I say. And here's another example of his work. This is the best of Judas Priest, and I'm aware you can't see all of that because of the obies and bits and bobs, but I will do a video at some point showing you my Japanese CD, simply because they're so beautiful, and you'll get to see that properly then. But that was Melvin's artwork, so he got the plum job on those last two CORUM books of Mayflower, which is interesting. And while we're at it, this of course is the album where Moorcock made quite a big contribution, which I consider to be part of the Eternal Champion cycle, and that's Hawkwind's Warrior on the Edge of Time. And I've got multiple editions of this, and this is one of my favourite records of all time, and you will never ever ever hear a record as colourful as this in terms of the tone colour. And Moorcock recites 3 poems on here, and it does relate to the cycle in a sort of subtle way, but there's an awful lot of subtle links between all the books that bring the Eternal Champion cycle all together. So yeah, but very beautiful, I think you'll agree. So if you're picking up Moorcock books from the Sword and Sorcery series particularly, just to read, you can end up with lots and lots of different liveries, which can be a bit frustrating if you're the sort of collector that wants to have a uniform edition. In the mid-80s, these absolutely gorgeous omnibus editions were issued by Grafton, because by this point Granada had become Grafton, and the Swords of CORUM was issued in 1986. I think Chronicles was the following year. And interestingly, you see, as it says Chronicles of CORUM rather than the Prince with the Silver Hand or the Scarlet Robe or what have you. So just to look at the Swords of CORUM, this I think is one of the nicest Moorcock books ever published. It's absolutely stunning jacket in this CORUM there, lovely artwork and beautiful red spine. And this book has a particularly strong meaning to me because it's the first book my partner, the video widow, ever bought for me. And there's a little inscription inside which is very personal, so I'm not going to show it to you, but it's in lovely blue leather and absolutely stunning, and nice end papers as well. Really, really good. And let's see to the artwork on this, and it's by Mark Solowski, and Mark Solowski did work for Grafton at this point because they relaunched all the Moorcock books and did new covers on them, and they're rather nice. I don't have many of them because by that point I had pretty much everything, so I never bothered to buy them, but you can still get them. They're really around for a few years, and they're really, really nice. And I'll try and flash some of them up on the screen in this video. And then there's the Chronicles of CORUM. And I will say, and this is quite badly spine faded, and that's my bad. It should be peach, as it is on the back of there. I wish I'd looked after that more. It's really not good bit of collecting there. This is Bull and the Spear, Oak and the Ram, and Sword and the Stallion. But unfortunately, this was sort of plain boards. You know, I was hoping that it would be the leather the same as on Swords, but it's not. Look at that, $9.95. And I'll just check the date for you. Let's just have a look, and let's see. And this is 86, so they were both 86. I knew the first one was, and there's a signature. Mike put that in there for me. That would have been probably the first time I did an event with him, which was 87, 88 maybe. I met him first 87 at the Worldcon. I think the event was, maybe it was early 88. It wasn't that long afterwards, but that was very much the thing. And did I get him to sign this one for me? Just check it out. I'm not certain, to be honest. I think he did. Yeah, there we go. And I've got loads of books signed by Mike because we did 3 events together, and he signed stuff for me at the Worldcon. Absolutely charming, lovely guy, and it was great to meet him. And Linda Steele was with him every time I met him. And of course, Linda Steele became his wife, and she's still with him today. And she had worked as a personal assistant to Harlan Ellison. Boy, what tales she could tell. So what do I think of the CORUM books? Well, I haven't read them all the way through for a very long time. I've read them twice. I think I've read Bull and the Spear, say 2.5, maybe 3 times, and I've just picked it up recently. And I like them. I think they're good. They're very, very colourful and psychedelic. I do consider them to be quite minor, though compared to a lot of other people's sword and sorcery, they are streets and streets ahead. They're very inventive, extremely colourful, as I say. They're very fleet and full of the kind of interesting quasi-moralising that you get from Elric. CORUM less. So CORUM's less intense. He's probably my least favourite of the three major sword and sorcery characters: Elric, Hawkmoon and CORUM. Erekose, I do feel John Dacre is different because he has a really full awareness of the fact that he is the Eternal Champion. So CORUM goes through some rough stuff, but it's a good ride and there's wonderful symbolism and stuffed with ideas all the way through. So they are great fun to pick up if you're a sword and sorcery fan. And they have very much that sort of Thundersickle decadent feeling, which is missing from so much sword and sorcery now. And, you know, they are just testament to his genius as a storyteller, the elegance, the wit, the level of invention, purely for what other people would be hack work to make some money to keep things going. And, you know, you just have to admire that, to bring artistry into even the books, which were done very quickly just to sort of keep things rolling along. It really, really is quite something. So there's some different editions of the CORUM books. Hope you've enjoyed that. There'll be more Moorcock to come on the channel. I will talk in a bit more depth about reading orders, things like that, and my feelings about them aesthetically. But that's all for now, I think. I'm really delighted to share these with you, and I'm absolutely blown away to get Bull and the Spear and to complete the Alison and Busby trilogy. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.